I've got bad news, guys. I'm being told that South Park sucks now. Probably because they didn't air their new episode on Wednesday for the first time, I think, in the history of their show. South Park's new episode, The Woman in the Hat, was their latest Halloween special, and I think it is the first ever episode to air a different night of the week on Friday, with this one being delayed to air on Halloween, which is also why this breakdown is late. The episode delivered two pretty distinct but parallel stories. We finally got a bit of focus on the boys, but in an incredibly metatextual story about the state of South Park, hence the whole South Park sucks now thing, and the continuation of the more serialized Trump x Satan storyline, bringing a lot of the season's stories together into a sort of haunted house episode. I think there is a lot to say about not just the episode here, but what it says about the state and future of South Park. So let's dive into season 28, episode 2, The Woman in the Hat. Still weird that this is season 28 already. And hey, if you like this breakdown, not only am I going to cover every episode of the new season, or season 28 now, I guess, but I have a ton of South Park episodes, character, and lore breakdown videos across the channel, so I would love it if you considered subscribing. Thank you so much. So, this episode finally followed up the events of the third episode of the year, in which the Marshes finally moved away from Tegrity Farms. And honestly, it felt kinda crazy that it took them 4 more episodes to address that, with some pretty big reveals along the way. Now, Stan obviously really hated Tegrity Farms.
Times are hard, and I know we all miss Tegrity.
I don't miss Tegrity, Dad.
But here we find out that he has also hated his post-Tegrity Farms life so far because they actually couldn't afford to move into their old house and have been living in a motel. And I'm happy that they're actually turning this post-Tegrity life into a story, not just an immediate reversion back to the status quo of years past. But the episode sees the Marshes leave the motel and move in with Stan's grandfather at Shady Acres, which, yeah, it's probably a worse place to live than Tegrity Farms, I'd say. But this episode takes Stan's frustrations with his life and turns it into a full-on metatextual commentary that is basically just responding to the fan reactions to this season of South Park so far.
The truth is, I think a lot of people are just afraid to admit that South Park sucks now.
Personally, I am a big fan of when Matt and Trey have this sort of back and forth with their audience about the state of the show, and I think it makes sense to use Stan in this context. Stan being sort of fed up with how things are going is a relatively common occurrence in South Park, with this obviously taking center stage in the classic You're Getting Older episodes in season 15, which I think was probably up until that point the most metatextual any episode had ever been in the show's history. And obviously this entire season, or season 27 and 28 I guess, have been met a bit divisively from the fandom, given their relentless focus on Trump and his administration. Personally, I really liked the way this episode's story approached this idea, but again, I'm a fan of the metatextual back and forth in general. I do think that more so than the previous few episodes, this Halloween special really did feel like 2 very separate stories happening simultaneously. Obviously, they overlap towards the end a bit, but they were largely disconnected across the board, which I would probably also argue is something that fans don't love about this ongoing season with the Trump/Satan stuff. For the sake of this video, we're going to cover the Stan and the Boys story before dipping into the serialized Trump stuff. I will also say, I don't think it's ever been clearer that Matt and Trey are super in tune with the fandom's reactions to things.
Remember when we used to do stuff? Just us guys?
A lot of Stan's complaints here are straight up things that I and many others have said about the show in our videos or on social media or on the Reddit, etc. Even in the episodes I've praised this year, anytime there isn't a focus on the main 4 boys, I have basically said that I'd really like to see a focus on the main 4 boys in the next one. I'm kind of a broken record in that way. Here, look, I said it at the end of my last breakdown. While the kids were a part of the storyline, none of the other boys got a spotlight. It would be nice if Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Butters maybe had to help and or save Cartman if he's taken to Washington. The next episode is also maybe a Halloween one, so those are great opportunities to focus on the kids being kids. It's funny, almost everything Stan says here, I can point back to my own videos and think, oh, this might be about me.
Like, Kenny, I haven't even heard you say anything in like 4 months.
Here's a clip from my Sycophancy breakdown a few months ago saying basically this. I feel like we haven't gotten a good Kenny episode since like The Scoots, which was actually just 1 episode after the very first Tegrity Farms episode. Let's get some Kenny episodes in here. Obviously, I'm not the only one saying these things. Kenny has his stands, but it is funny that I can just pull clips from my breakdowns this year, and this new episode feels like direct responses to some of those takes. This storyline obviously does take a pretty comedic turn, but as usual, I also think that comedic turn contains some pretty poignant commentary. Stan starts a South Park Sucks Now page online, and over 700,000 1,000 people join, lending a lot of validity to his feelings. But rather than create a movement or commiserate with those people, he goes another route.
The South Park sucks now cryptocurrency coin.
Yup, just a full-on crypto pump and dump rug pull scheme. Now, obviously there is commentary connective tissue here to the Trump of it all, given the fact that he and his family have made an estimated $1 billion on crypto, including via multiple meme coins like this one. But I also think from Stan's perspective, there is some really interesting cultural commentary here. Stan and his family are basically suffering the toughest times they ever have. They have gone through a lot historically, but not even having a home to live in is for sure the most we've seen them struggle. And obviously there's a lot at play there, including Randy's ineptitude, but they also make it pretty clear that the state of the country is also a big factor in their inability to get back on their feet. Randy points to the struggling job market, and also that the government shutdown is preventing him from getting his old job back. And obviously there are a lot of people struggling similarly right now in real life. The job market is really rough, inflation is rampant, rent is so high while the median income can't match it. And in this instance, Stan is willing to do anything to get out of that hole, including throw tons of other people under the bus. Fully unethical and immoral things that would actually harm other people's well-being for the sake of his own fulfillment. And if that isn't commentary on the state of this country, where the class disparity continues to widen, I don't know what is. The entire ecosystem is so unhealthy that in order to pull themselves out of poverty, people have to push others back down into it. And with Kyle's cousin Kyle's help, they aren't even pretending that this isn't the case here.
We're gonna screw a lot of people out of that money, boys. It's gonna be fantastic.
Obviously, Kyle has a major issue with this, as he would, but I do think that Kenny's inclusion in Stan's scheme is interesting. On one hand, he is the kid who has always been in poverty in South Park, so it sort of makes sense for him. But on the other hand, Kenny has also always been shown to be one of the more thoughtful, caring, and protective out of the main boys. I talk about this in pretty strong detail in my Big Kenny video I made a few years back. Check it out if you're interested. And obviously there are exceptions in his actions depending on circumstance and motivation, but it was a bit of a bummer to see him so willing to throw others under the bus here. It was also really fun to see cousin Kyle again. I don't think he's actually been in an episode since The Losing Edge, all the way back in season 9, though he did have some major story prominence in South Park: The Fractured But Whole, the video game. So I think that's really kind of the last time we saw him. But it was pretty funny to bring him in as the connective tissue to the Trump/Satan storyline here. And I guess before we get into the big wrap up for the boys, this is a good time to jump over to that side of the story. As I'm sure everybody has gotten used to this season, the other half of the episode was all centered around the ongoing Trump x Satan storyline with the impending birth of the Antichrist. In the last episode, we got a closer look at JD Vance's plan. It seems like he and Peter Thiel are going to use Cartman's possessed state to get rid of the Antichrist baby somehow. Thiel because he's obsessed with stopping the Antichrist, and Vance because he doesn't want anyone to take his position as next in line behind Trump. But this part of the story feels like it took a bit of a back seat this week. Thiel was supposed to take Cartman to Washington, but instead is stalled out in a motel because people in Washington are on to their plan. I did think it was a little strange that none of the boys seemed to have any concern about where Cartman is, particularly in an episode where their whole thing is, remember when it was just us guys doing stuff? They were pointedly missing one of those guys, but it mostly feels like the story was stalled so they could do their Halloween-themed episode here, and honestly, I really enjoyed this aspect. The entire season has slowly been introducing or creating these borderline monsters from Trump's administration. Kristi Noem's melting face going full-on substance, Brendan Carr turning into this lumbering zombie mummy that has lost his free speech, Don Jr. looking like Don Jr. This episode also introduced Stephen Miller as a sort of Igor-like servant at the White House, and Pam Bondi, whose nose just keeps mysteriously covering itself in shit, rounding out a pretty decent group of monster parallels. I particularly enjoyed the Miller characterization. I mean, that guy is a straight-up ghoul. I could maybe have done with a little less shit on Pam Bondi's face, but it was funny. They basically turned the White House into a full-on haunted house, and I think creatively and visually, my absolute favorite aspect of this episode was how they portrayed Melania Trump. Obviously, she has not really been referenced so far in South Park, since Trump is in a full-on relationship with Satan, but they portray her as this specter haunting the White House, wearing her signature large-brimmed hat, completely obfuscating her face, and I genuinely thought this was just such a great quote-unquote scary design. It is honestly spooky as hell, and the way it just stands in the corner, this was good. Well done. We also get a little Towley cameo as Trump's towel here, and I have to presume that somehow Towley is the one leaking the info about Vance's plan, since we know he's the only one who overheard that phone conversation, but obviously he's just sort of been in the background here. Overall, this wasn't a particularly consequential story, and felt incredibly disconnected from the rest of the episode, but I did appreciate their approach to a Halloween story here. The spooky shots of the White House, making it look fully haunted, were really cool, especially the exterior, and I just found the return of all the Trump administration ghouls to be pretty enjoyable, not to mention the great cut to credits with this haunting old-timey song and the woman in the hat in the White House window. But overall, despite being so rooted in serialized elements of the season, it really didn't feel like it moved the serialized story forward very much, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it makes sense that people are starting to feel like the whole Trump side of things is making South Park feel like a different show. We'll get back to that later. The way these stories connect is Cousin Kyle seeking Don Jr.'s help to approve their crypto rug pull, and interestingly, they actually named him Don Jr. in this episode after keeping him nameless in his first introduction. But Cousin Kyle gets so freaked out by the haunted White House that he fully throws in the towel and admits to his real motivations with their meme coin.
Crypto's just a giant money laundering scheme for the rich to get richer. Please don't haunt us anymore.
Leading to his incarceration, but basically as a patsy for the crypto laundering scheme. Pretty clear commentary considering the Trump ties to crypto. So obviously the connection here is that the meme coin goes nowhere and Stan has to remain at Shady Acres, which leads to the final beats and some more pretty clear-cut meta commentary. Stan laments that things are not going to go back to the way things used to be, which is clearly Matt and Trey commenting on the fan reaction to the approach their show has been taking this year, saying, "Sorry guys, we know you miss old South Park, but we're running with this storyline and going to see it through." But it also leaves with this optimistic take both for South Park's future and for the future of the country, hopefully.
I know it's hard to see right now, but things will go back to normal. And in the meantime, we just have to make the most of where we are.
I think this is pretty interesting because it shows that, to a degree, even Matt and Trey acknowledge that we're missing out on classic South Park stories. I've seen some fans say this is them admitting the show is bad now, which I don't agree with. Personally, I find this whole season and admission of their true desires versus their actions to be pretty interesting. Matt and Trey have long said that they too prefer the kids doing stuff storylines, and yet they continue to wade into the waters of the political commentary storylines. They said just last year that they were exhausted by covering Trump on the show, and yet this season has featured Trump every single episode. And obviously you've got plenty of people crying TDS or calling them liberal media shills now, which is very funny to me given their entire history, and particularly because, to me, it feels like Matt and Trey see themselves in a pretty unique position here. They have a show that is not afraid to criticize anyone. They are known for this, and they are also uniquely positioned in that they have a massive audience that crosses political aisles. I think given their history, especially the way they have objected to extremism, there is just no way they would be covering the stuff so thoroughly if they didn't feel an almost obligation to do it. I know people are exhausted by it, and it is exhausting, but I also think the criticisms that it's the same jokes over and over are pretty inaccurate. Sure, there are some jokes that repeat themselves, but those are all seasoning on what has otherwise been completely separate and pointed criticisms towards different aspects of the Trump administration. Every episode focuses on something new, and given the nonsense that they got caught up in with the Paramount debacle, I'm not surprised they started off the season a little salty about it all. Matt and Trey have been known to double and triple down in their history. I mean, look at all the band episodes. It feels to me like Matt and Trey are pretty committed to seeing through this Trump, Hussein, Satan, Antichrist storyline across this season, and then, after that, who's to say? My expectation is that we won't see something quite like this in subsequent seasons, but obviously everything's on the table, who knows? And while I personally definitely prefer the more kid-centric stories and do miss that brand of South Park, I'm relatively excited to see how this season all comes together. They have put a lot of chess pieces on the board, and given the extra time that they've been taking to make each episode, it feels to me like things are going to coalesce in a pretty interesting and hopefully satisfying way. Obviously, we are leading up to the birth of the Antichrist, which I think is the big question mark that could make or break the season. How does that pan out? What is the Antichrist? What are we looking at here? Trump secretly wants that baby aborted, but I am personally expecting some kind of showdown with Jesus, who hopefully will revert back from his new power Christian attitude, come to his senses, and stop the Antichrist. Or maybe power Christian Jesus is the Antichrist, and it'll be a subversion? Lots of possibilities here. We've still got Towley trapped at the White House, seemingly leaking info on JD Vance and Peter Thiel's plan. Cartman is possessed by the 6-7 demon and appears to be instrumental in playing a role in stopping the Antichrist, and Vance is obviously trying to take over the country from Trump Hussein. They've got a lot of balls in the air here, and I feel like the fact that they've been so committed to taking their time on each episode this season means they're poised more than ever to possibly catch all of them. And I really hope they manage, because despite my personal preferences in regards to the focus this year, I could see this being a really satisfying conclusion when all is said and done. Hopefully one that might make people appreciate the season more as a whole. Overall, this wasn't one of my favorites of the year, but I did have fun with it. The metatextual stuff always hits me in a way that I find entertaining, and I think the haunted house detour for the season was a pretty inspired idea, despite the episode maybe feeling a bit disconnected between its A and B stories. This breakdown was a little late, so our next episode is actually next week on November 12th, presuming no more delays, and I'm eager to see where it's all going. But what did you think of the episode? How are you feeling about the way this ongoing story is coming together? I don't know. How do I normally end these things?
Like and subscribe, smash the button, upvote, whatever the hell you need to do.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.